You're listening to Coffee and Culture. We're on Talk 1260 and 103.7 KTRC, streaming at santafe.com. I'm your host every other week. My name is Matthew Chase Daniel, and today I have two guests, both named Jennifer. Jennifer Schlesinger, who runs Obscura Gallery here in Santa Fe, and Jennifer DeCarlo, who is the representative of Luis González Palma's work in the United States. So the two of them are putting together this exhibition, and it's basically Jennifer Schlesinger's exhibition with support from Jennifer DeCarlo. And so we're here to talk about the show and about Luis González Palma's work. It's a series called Möbius, which he's been working on for 15 years or so, 14 years, something like that. Luis González Palma is a photographer in his 60s, I believe, born in Guatemala, lives in Argentina. Pretty well known, pretty beautiful work. And one thing I sort of love about looking through his work this morning is the different bodies of work that he's done over the years since the mid 90s, and how much, I find when I'm looking at art, some artists find their groove and do the same thing, variations on a small thing over and over, and others do really diverse work that pushes into different directions. And one thing I really appreciate about Luis González Palma's work is that it moves into those different directions. And it's not, it may be recognizable or not, some of the work from the early work, but it's also very different and maybe addressing a lot of the same themes, but through different visual mechanisms. So does that sound right?
I really like, no one wants to know how old anyone is. And no one, but what you're saying now, that's the reason I am so excited to work with Louise and his work and to watch how much it's changed over time. I feel like for me, the mark of a real, true, good artist is someone who's like willing to break their own ideas open again. I feel like he's what you said too about themes, like it's coming farther out, farther out, farther out, or like closer in. I feel like when I talk about Louise, I think of him, he's a photographer, but really not. He's an artist. He's sculpting, he's using photographs as objects. He's always done that. Um, I think they have a life and a physicality, all of his work.
Yeah, his early work that people may be most familiar with are these beautiful portraits, sort of with the sitter for the portrait facing directly at the camera with a very stolid gaze at the camera and at us,
Yeah.
therefore. And but they're not just they're black and white photography, but then modified with tar, with bitumen, with chemicals and sepia tones, and so they have a sort of old feel and a richness of grain and texture that I adore.
Yeah. I mean,
And
there's,
they,
yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, with on a paper, like the paper was the object, the paper became the object. And sometimes they would curl or they would have, thread in them. I mean, there was like so many different pieces to it. I feel like the earlier pieces,
Yeah. Like you'll
that
see
they,
thumbprint,
yeah.
or they're not perfect. They're not perfectly square, or they're to be framed, so there's space left, but it's like he lets you see that edge. I
Hmm.
like that. We don't always get to see that when they're formally presented, but like when you're behind seeing all these pieces, it's like
Yeah.
he's in them. And right, like he was always painting. It was a paint. I mean, it's not paint, but the way it's applied.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and on those early pieces and some in the Mobius pieces too, you have this sort of sepia and bitumen layer over everything except the whites of the eyes, which give them this intensity. And I've looked at them, I've known them a little bit for years and always found that intensity. But it's not until I was reading this morning of the technique that I was like, oh, right, that part is like the only white in the image and everything else is toned down. And the works are all about humanity and they're very personal and personal experience, it seems. That's sort of the through line throughout. And a lot of trauma and despair and sort of the beauty of life being both things that we normally find beautiful, but also things that are complicated and difficult and not necessarily easy to describe in words.
Yeah. I think that's why he makes art. I think that's why a lot of artists, they can't find words, so they try to communicate with objects. And yeah.
Yeah, someone once, I forget who wrote that, but someone said it about writing an artist statement. If they, someone asked them, what's your work about? And they said, well, if I could describe what it was about, I wouldn't have had to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But his work really works well that way. So this show well, it's opening this weekend on Friday, but we're recording a little in advance. So it runs from May 9th through June 21st. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And Obscura Gallery is, you've been in your new location for a year or two?
Yeah, going on a year and a half this
Yeah.
June. Yeah, it'll be a
Yeah.
year and a half. And we're open Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 5. So even though the show, will have opened on Friday, we'll be open Saturday and then we'll be open Tuesday and kind of run on that schedule just so people are aware of our hours.
Great. Yeah. And it's 225 Delgado Street, which is, if you start up Canyon Road from Paseo, it's the first street on your left, and you're just down there on the right in that first little area there. Nice spot and different from where before your gallery. Well, you've moved around a little bit, but you used to be on Paseo, kind of near the Capitol. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the new space is intimate and beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So talk a bit, either one of you, about this series, Möbius, the new work that you're showing.
Well, I'll let Jennifer
Oh.
DeCarlo talk about it because she's really brilliant. She wrote a really wonderful essay about it that I've used for my press release. And I do just kind of want to give some information background about this show real quick so people understand. So Jennifer DeCarlo at JDC Fine Art represents Luis González Palma, and she approached me, as we're colleagues and friends, and asked if I would be interested in doing a show in Santa Fe of his work. And of course I jumped to it because who wouldn't? People love Palma here. He's had several shows here in Santa Fe, and I think people are sophisticated enough in Santa Fe that they recognize his work, they know his name, and it just seemed like absolutely necessary to accept that offer. So yeah, I just wanted to give that introduction so people understand this is a collaboration with Jennifer DeCarlo and myself and Luis. And so we're thrilled to bring him here to Santa Fe. And I think Jen really speaks really well of the work. So I'm going to let you take it from here about the Möbius series that we're showing here.
Yeah. So,
Wait, actually, sorry, Jen.
yeah.
Before we're going to go to a break and then get to that.
Oh, okay.
We're
Sorry
at
about that.
10-minute
Okay.
section. No, that was a good introduction. We'll be back in just a minute. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. I'm here with Jennifer DeCarlo and Jennifer Schlesinger talking about Luis González Palma's show Möbius, which is up now at Obscura Gallery on Delgado Street. So Jen DeCarlo, you were about to talk about the Möbius series.
Yeah, so Luis's work is, as we were saying earlier, it's evolved significantly over time. There have always been threads that have been the same, I feel like what this work is really like where he's breaking out because it's not old, but it's not new. He's changed a lot. In fact, just after APAT, I looked, he's put more work on his site that I have to learn about. So it's changed a lot in a way since people who in your area know it. But it's also changed again a lot since this show. But in this show, it's a nice way to like break out and break open ideas that are familiar and new. So we talked about, Luis using multiple techniques in his work, collage, treating photographs as objects, but also like using painting theories, using sculptural theories, destroying his work. He used to tear it, right? Using red like thread and ribbon in his work, red acrylic in his work. And we see some of the gold leaf in his work, and we see this in Möbius. We see, like a reinvestigation of these materials and of the self. He started working with archives, his own archives and other archives. In his own archives, we know some of these portraits from before. Some of them are new, but some of them are famous. And he is integrating two kinds of language, realism and abstraction, photography and painting. There's a fluidity here. Möbius, this word, is rooted in mathematics and theory. And it's, I actually remember when he first told us about this new work, he showed us with a piece of paper how you do. It's, you take something that has two ends. It's a terminal flat plane. It's flat and it has two ends. Well, when you connect the ends with a quarter turn, it becomes an infinite loop. And I mean, so it's like, Luis's work, I think of him really as, we say, oh, a photographer, and that's how he came to us, through photography. But he's really an artist who uses visual language to contemplate our existential existence, or even a philosopher who's using objects to do that. I mean, especially you look at what he's doing now and it's like, wow. I mean, so this work that Jen's showing, she selected, we looked together. I think it's a really good set. It's beautiful. They're stunning. They're elegant. They're quiet. They're open. The other thing we haven't talked about with like this sort of approach of abstraction, we think of things, right? They're opposite, realism and abstraction. Okay. It's
Yeah.
also like theoretically an idealistic language, that it could change the world, that it was open, that it was, we think even maybe roots to the Bauhaus.
You're talking
And
about abstraction as an
yeah,
approach.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
now, he's putting those two, and you were talking earlier about the gaze and the way he's employed that. It's quiet, it's soft, it's deep, it's moody, it's seductive, it's and now they're together, these languages, and like the new possibilities that could emerge. That's what this work is about.
Yeah. And he was trained as an architect, and you can see that in a lot of his work. Some of the older work where there's like a table leg that goes through a chair or two chairs that are joined together, where it's obviously a fabricated scene in a room and then photographed. And so it's using architecture and design like that to
Yeah.
invoke meaning. And then in this Möbius work, it's these geometric abstraction of these different colors and gold leaf and that is drawing on that language, like you say, of abstraction, Bauhaus and Latin American abstraction and that whole sort of modernist movement that had that is in a way has a political thing more than an emotional direction to it. So mixing the two is very interesting. Um, there's also that I was reading in somebody's essay about influence of Ligia Clark, Brazilian artist, who made these did stuff with Möbius and hands, but also did work of these sort of folded geometric forms that, and over time she became more and more interested in the human interaction with that, and that it was work that was made that was very visceral. And even though it was drawing on this modernist abstraction, it was involved with the body and the way um, what were first called viewers and later she called participants were interacting with the work. And then that led her to art, working as an art therapist. And so I thought that was an interesting sort of taking off place for this Möbius work.
Well, I don't know that there's a connection there, but it's necessarily, but there's that's where you need the artist in the room. But you know, Luis has also used hands. Previous to this, he used hands a lot too. There was a series of gestures that involved hands and the enunciation, and he was at that point embedding still images in resin, like some of those other pieces you mentioned, the architectural pieces you're calling them, like figures. You know, it's like how objects can sort of stand in for people or missing people and like the absent body and some of that. So I can say that, you know, sometimes you go into a space and those ideas are there because they're rooted inside the theory, you know, so.
Yeah. I think there's that what you're talking about as those objects showing that the people are absent is also, in my understanding, referring to the trauma of growing up during the wars and all the conflict in Guatemala, which went on for what, 30 or 40 years during his whole childhood,
Yeah.
and as very influential in his approach to the world. And it's interesting that so much of the work or the early work and now repurposing that earlier work are of indigenous Guatemalan Mayan people. And they, to me, it has this sort of, it draws you in because of the beauty and the otherness and the, you know, there's that his maybe most famous picture of this bare-breasted young woman looking at the camera, and you find this beauty, but it also feels like voyeurism, like there's a trauma and a beauty
Oh, yeah.
both held in that image that's very
Like,
um,
be a viewer, right? You're implicated too as a viewer, right? I mean, I think that's maybe what you're feeling as well. The I think that that model's name is America.
uh,
And that piece that you're talking about is called La Rosa. And Jen has a piece, you do, yeah, in the show that is like a Mobius answer to that early work. I think everything else you said too is it's true. That's like in the work you're describing now is probably what Luis is most known for. In fact, when I took over as the US rep for him, I mean, he's busy and he needs one person in charge, but I need more than just me. And he's had a history of working with different galleries across the country. And, you know, some of those relationships are still good and strong and you know, but they also didn't evolve with him and he changed too much. And then things just sort of went on and we need to find new, and that's why I was excited to work with Jen on this, is like we need new connections if the old ones aren't interested in new directions,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Like we need that history and we're here because of it, but now like this new work, and this is like a real bridge. This work is a real bridge. His new work is just like so smart and theoretical and quiet and I mean, that's another word, silence, you know, but you know, this old work you're talking about, when I talk to Louise, it's like he says it's like nothing to do. Like, and it's I did a survey basically when I took over, like he's in a lot of museum collections. But it's only the work made in the first decade or like 15 years, that's it. Then
yeah,
what? You know, and so there's just so much more, you know, that's out there that we need to see and think about and engage with. I think the stories, you know, I think with Louise, it was personal and it was about the place he's from, but it's also like, this is what humans do to one another.
yes, very
This is
much
what we
so.
do.
Yeah, it's
Like,
very personal and it's very universal.
yeah.
Yeah. We
So
have to go to another break. We'll be right back. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. We broadcast on AM 1260 and FM 103.7, which is KTRC. That streams at santafe.com. And then podcasts of the shows that I do, you can find through my website, chasedaniel.com, or just look what any podcast platform at Chase, what is it called? Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel. So that's on whatever, Spotify and Amazon and all those kind of things. I'm talking today with Jennifer Schlesinger, who owns and runs Obscura Gallery on Delgado Street and has a show that's up now through summer solstice, June 21st, on Luis González Palma's work. And I'm also talking with Jennifer DeCarlo, who runs JDC Fine Art and is the representative in the US for Luis's work over the last year. And so we're talking about how you were saying, Jennifer DeCarlo, before the break, a little about how some dealers, he rose to prominence in the 90s and did a really compelling body of work. And then as an artist, he's exploring all these different directions. And some dealers are like, no, I just want more of those old ones. And other dealers are willing to go and follow where he's going, which I find wonderful and but challenging and useful. And it's a tricky thing in the world of art and representing artists and showing art, how much of it, because there's a commercial aspect to it because we're trying to sell it, but there's also sort of a aesthetic and spiritual aspect to it where we're trying to get these ideas out in the world and challenge people. And sometimes when people are challenged, there's all different reasons that people collect artwork and buy artwork. And some of it is a beautiful thing to hang on the wall. And sometimes it's a challenging intellectual thing to hang on the wall. And sometimes it's something to store away in a drawer and see if it increases in value. And so I applaud you for going in that direction and showing this work of his, which all these different bodies of work, these haiku pieces and these little pillars that are like mirrors that sit on a distorted image, and you look in the
yeah,
little pillar, and these like old ceramics with like McDonald's arches painted on
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Um,
Though I think that was a commission. He will do commissions, and he's done some really cool public works. I haven't seen any because they're not in the United States, so that would be great. Um, yeah, you said a lot. There's
I'll
so
just
many ways I could like jump into any part
yeah.
of that, but I mean, for me, this is exciting. We're starting like I think a new generation. I think we were just at APAD, and a few of the dealers who sort of encouraged me before I even thought I'd want to do this. Go into having a gallery. Um, they said you and some of the others like Jen, who's on the board of APAD, the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. Some of the old guard who sort of encouraged us along the way are like, you guys are the new generation, and that's ultimately kind of what we're doing. We're bringing this voice that into the future. We're giving it a platform to exist as it is. We can't, I think a lot of dealers too, right? We have an aesthetic that appeals to our clientele, and we also can't change too much from it. What can we do? It's hard. Sometimes that's hard. And it is hard to always, evolve with artists sometimes. I mean, I think that comes down to the dealer, like for me, I do this as an art. So, I mean, I'm like, you want to do this? Let's do it. I think your work is great. Like, I love your vision. I'm on board with you,
Yeah.
but the work that Jen's showing and that I mostly brought to APAD, it's kind of the same period, like in that case, it was like in the booth, I had 2006 to 2014 or something. Jen, I don't know. What are your dates in there? Do you know?
Yeah, they're mostly like 2013, 2014, around that, I
Yeah,
would say. I think the newest, maybe 2019. Yeah, I would say 2013 to 2019
you
is
know,
where we're
and
at. Yeah.
these pieces have been shown and available. It takes a while too for people to like first. I think when you are working with an artist who's really kind of a visionary, they're going to be ahead of their time. Okay. So
Yeah.
you can get on board with it and just like jump in the river, or you can wait for it to make sense. And however you're approaching it, that is fine. But I think that's kind of where we are too. Like,
And yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this new work is it will feel familiar to people
yeah,
who are familiar with his work already, like Matthew was saying. But what he's doing with this Möbius geometric abstraction is sort of like like you said, like looping it back around and bringing it back to the familiar, but also they almost become like these portals that you look through to see the portrait. And then it's like, wow, you see it in a different light. And even so, whether you knew his work prior, great, it'll
yeah.
feel familiar, or whether you didn't and it's new to you, it's going to draw you in. So either way, it's kind of it's in my feeling, it's very successful. I think he's such a visionary, and he's always been one of my favorite. I mean, he's always been one of my favorite artists by far, hands down. And to actually have his work like hanging on the wall in Obscura is really truly an honor, because it did come full loop for someone who studied photography and studied his work and knew of his work when I was studying photography and the history of photography, and then to have it loop back around, here, for me, it makes a lot of sense, and it feels really good. So yeah, it's great. I mean, my only downside of the whole thing is I still haven't gotten to meet him. But we've had some communications, through the socials and things like that. But he lives in Argentina, so he's excused. He can't make it all the way out here for the opening or the show. But
Well,
what a visionary,
I
right?
Yeah.
loved what you said about like it's like a portal, or like they're almost like prismic, or they're like rhythmic. Like they almost have a sound.
Mhm.
Other things he did from here, he worked with an observatory and mapped the sky. He's made a music box that plays like the sound of the stars. Um, he has worked with an archive and a score by Beethoven, where he's taken like the musicians' sheet music and removed all of the notes, so it's just the scratches, like the notes on top of the notes that are making the image. He's taken portraits of religious figures and subjects that were like an original like tintypes. I think they were tintypes, but like and he, I guess, there's an archive, and he's removed the figure, except everything else is there. So the mark of touch, or like the ambient light, or scratches in the plate, that's what it is. That's it. And then some of those also have these kind of Mobius things on them, as well. So, I mean, that's a big change from here. It's almost like time is dissolving and reappearing.
Yeah. I love there's a piece, I believe it's in the show that Jen has, and it's that original image that we were talking about, the girl named America, but it's coated over with a green emulsion, or it's printed light or whatever, and then there's some geometric lines and stuff in it. And it's almost like we're looking into our own memory in some
Mhm.
weird way. Like, oh yeah, I recognize that, but this looks different.
It's like a dream. It almost
Yeah,
feels like it's like the interpretation of his, some kind of dream, surreal dream is what
yeah,
that image feels like to me.
yeah, yeah, it's great. Um, and yeah,
You know,
that
like
um,
the materials, like I was thinking this, but it hasn't come up yet, but like acrylic as a material, and in Mobius and in other works, even early works, he painted with acrylic in collage work early. Here it's acrylic, but acrylic, like, so that one that you're talking about, I think that one is maybe washed in like an acrylic, and then he's also painted. Is it is the one you have has striping?
Yeah, vertical
It does.
lines, red
Yeah.
and black. Or
Other things that happen in Möbius are, well, like acrylic, so like it's plastic, it can be anything. Like
yeah,
again with architecture and like light and I think of even the acrylic here like that. Um, he also worked with fabrics in this series and felt and printing on felt and making sculptures. Um, we think too about the way history is recorded in Latin America in textiles.
right. We have to go to a break. I'm sorry to cut you off. We'll be back for our last segment in just a little bit. Matthew Chase Daniel talking to Jennifer DeCarlo and Jennifer Schlesinger about Luis González Palma's new show coming at Obscura. You're back listening to Coffee and Culture. Podcasts of this and other past shows. I've been doing this a couple of years, so there's lots of podcasts with interesting artists and writers and scientists and gallery and museum people and curators, things like that. Go to chasedaniel.com and go to podcasts and you can see them all. Or on any other podcast platform, look for Coffee and Culture with Matthew Chase Daniel. This is our last segment of this show, and we're talking about Luis González Palma, who's a Guatemalan artist who uses photography, but also uses all sorts of different mediums. Photography is sort of the jumping off point for lots of exploration over the last 30 or 40 years that he's been showing work around here. And so there's a show at Obscura Gallery mostly of this series called Möbius, which he's been working on. And one interesting thing about the Möbius project that I was reading is that he's not taking new photographs for it. He's going back into his own archive and into other archives. And
Yeah.
that seems almost like a statement in itself, like whether it's political or aesthetic or something, it's like, I don't want to make more. I just want to interpret the world. And in a way, photography for me, as someone who makes photographs, is a way of editing the world. Like I look through the camera and I see things and I choose when to make a photograph. Um, and much more than like painting with it. With painting, you have like this blank canvas and then you make marks and you create something. And with photography, you choose what to select out of an existing world. And it's sort of like this Möbius project. He's choosing things to select out of an existing world as well. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, so I actually heard him give an artist talk at Medium Festival of Photography in San Diego when he was talking about this work and this transition, which was after he'd made the pieces in Jen's show, for example. I don't know the date that he was here. It might have been 2016, 2017, something like that. And I think what happened is he said in that address to San Diego's, photo enthusiast, audience, I realized I could make any picture. I could make any picture I wanted. And that was less interesting than, looking back at what it means to work with something that exists now and thinking about that. I also think, this is my interpretation, that some of this might have been a little bit of like a reaction to, say, a lot of dealers who didn't want to move on with him. I don't know how much that impacted him, but maybe it's like,
Yeah.
like it's a statement, like, and maybe that's part of it, but I think it's like to reinvent. I mean, he went on to do other projects where he reinvented, well, not reinvented from himself, but reinvented from like other existing archives. But I think this was a bridge. I mean, it has to be called that. It's like a bridge. It's a bridge between old and new, between old methods and new methods, between what we know and what we could know, between, like it's a place to go farther into the self. And and then I think, working with these other archives, it is interesting. It makes you think about perspective. I mean, he's using some of the same, presence and absence that he'd used before. When we
Mhm.
see, erasing religious figures, like, what do you think? I don't know. I mean, what would this be if we hadn't had colonization? I don't know. What would it be if we didn't have, the implications of religion, like what, it's like, so that's my interpretation of some of the works,
Yeah. Well, also there's, I think he's very much rooted in his life in Latin America, in as a Guatemalan and in Argentina. And when we look at that as citizens of the United States, which is our own, like there's, and especially in these days, in the United States, there's this difference between like this, the Möbius stuff has this modernist stuff and then this very physical human indigenous stuff in it to some degree. The gaze, the human body, and then the abstraction. And in the United States, we've moved increasingly into this sort of abstract world where it's like right now we're all talking on Zoom, on this weird thing beaming through a satellite to be able to talk to each other. And yet and that's increasingly taking over our ways of thinking here, in our weird superpower country. And in Argentina and in Guatemala especially, there is that influence strongly, but there is also a much maybe more strongly rooted Mayan presence in Guatemala, say, or farming, working the land, herding animals, a real connection to the physical sort of grit of being a human, that we try and get away from. And so when I see the Möbius work, and now this is my very personal interpretation, it's looking at those two things in conflict with each other or in opposition to each other, one impinging on the other, one destroying the other. And that also has to do, as a lot of his work, with sort of absence and trauma and death and detachment and all of that.
Yeah. Well, you'd asked about some of the other work that's in the show. Jen has some of the conjugación de intimidad, conjugation of intimacy, that was a collaborative work. He's worked with a few like say master printers or the like over time, and he made some ambrotypes that are in the show that kind of are maybe addressing that space we're fishing around in. There are these diptychs, and it's like one side is velvet, with a velvet with text, and the other is an ambrotype. They're like either a landscape. I'm trying to remember, Jen, which you have.
She has one with there's like these chandeliers in the
Yeah,
forest and a person sitting on the ground.
ground. Yeah, I mean, so, and then there's a river. You have the chair in a river, and then a
Yeah.
third. You have a third one?
I only have two. I just have those two. Yeah.
Yeah, so
I
they
mean,
were a few, and they were made in collaboration with his wife, and I think, were these Shigura or were they someone else? I send you the information on that.
What's
They had,
what is an ambrotype? Do you know?
it's an image that's on glass. So so basically it almost is a negative because it's on glass. So you back it with black or something dark that will then render it as a positive, but it's a photograph on glass in
I see.
simplest terms. Yeah.
Right.
right, but
And it's
like again, you can only see it because you've painted it, right? And
Right. Like if you did not paint the background or the back of it black or dark, then you would see right through it. It would look like a negative on glass.
I see.
Yeah,
Interesting.
so we see
And it's
again.
an old 19th century process.
correct. It's typically made with like wet plate collodion, which is the wet plate, the collodion is the photosensitive element, and you expose it when it's wet. I mean,
Right.
there's certainly different ways people make them now, but that was the original way that they were made in
Right.
camera. Yeah.
Right.
right? And then so these are complicated works. They're complicated, and they're relating. Again, we see them use red like it's a symbol, right? We've talked about red thread, red ribbon, red acrylic. This is red velvet. The setup of this object's format is like also kind of like a case, right? You know, we'd see these amber types would often be in cases. So the velvet, you know, and I also think of velvet like we haven't necessarily gone here to all the way, but like, you know, some of the first places that Louise encountered visual language and high art was in cathedrals, where there's the paintings and the sculptures and the carved you know, like, what's the word I'm looking
Altar
for?
pieces.
The altar pieces, thank you. And ironwork, I mean, all of these things, but you know, velvet too, like the velvet robes. I mean, I think of those things because, as I call myself, a recovering Catholic.
Yeah.
You know,
I think
so
he's might say the same from
And
what I
these
read.
pieces, these feel very like they're like visual poems. I mean, that's how I interpret them.
yeah,
Because you have one side, you have the image, and the next side in Spanish, you have this poetry almost. And
Yeah.
then one of the pieces is called I, and the other piece is called we. So it's like, you know, I as in myself, and then we. And so I think that you know, he's collaborating with his wife, and it's about love, it's about relationships, that kind of thing. But there's definitely something deeper going on
yeah,
there.
this is like some of the other framework baggage. So yeah, Jen's right. That's what they are, like more directly and specifically. So the writing was done by his wife at the time, and like it's kind of about the connection, the almost connection, the tension between connection and relationships.
Yeah.
Like, can we ever communicate?
Yeah.
Can we
We're out of time.
Oh
Oh
no.
Can we ever communicate? That's the final part. So everyone come out and see the Luis González Palma show Möbius at Obscura Gallery through June 21st. Thank you both.
Thank you.